Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're piecing together the latest and the attack that took place in Nice on Bastille Day. At least 84 killed, dozens more injured as a truck rampaged on the famed promenade, the Promenade des Anglais in the Riviera resort of Nice. With us to talk about it, Senator Joël Garriaud-Mallam, who is with the opposition conservative Les Républicains party. Pierre Conessa, who teaches at the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po. Louis Bernard, founder of security consultants Chrysotech.
Yes. I don't know.
And Benjamin Herbibou of Entre Autres joins us from Nice. Benjamin, remind our viewers, what is Entre Autres?
Entre Autres is a French organization working on de-radicalization. We're working with the government on two different fields. The first one is about following the individuals that are radicalized and following also their families, because it's really a social problem, because they suffer a lot. They don't understand how could it happen to their children. So we need to help them. We need to help their children, especially when they are young, to get out of it, because we have to save them from it. The second field is a field of preventing radicalization, which means that we need to understand what is the process that leads an individual to become radicalized, which means that we need to understand how can an ideology like jihadism can come in, especially in France, when we know the culture and the specific values of France. The third thing that I would add, we're working in a committee that is called TRAC, Terrorism and Radicalization Advisory Committee, in order to prevent radicalization and also to prevent the financial aspects of terrorism.
All right, that's an important point. Of course, there's still questions unanswered when it came to the money issue of the truck rental in this particular case, for most notably. Now, 84 victims, among the victims, Muslims, natives of a city that has known successive waves of North African immigrants, and same as in other places in France, several strains of Islam.
I've
supervised university studies showing that today in Nice there are between 15 and 20 informal places of worship, meaning not official. And since those sites are informal and unofficial, they circulate messages which we don't control, which are for the most part fundamentalist and radical messages.
Benjamin Herbibou, is that something you've witnessed as well, that there are people preaching radical Islam that, again, human intelligence is not keeping track of?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understood the question very well.
Well, we had that academic who said that there are informal places of worship in Nice where radical Islam is being preached. Is that something you've witnessed?
Not really. I would say that in our work, what we saw is that the way of getting radicalized is when you were raised in several ideological discourses, which gets you breaks from the French society, and that's when this point is achieved, that the jihadist ideology can be operating in a brain.
Pierre Conessa, the radicalization was quick in this particular instance, but is there a case as well of an intelligence failure when it comes to monitoring groups that are radical in France?
Well, you know, the process of radicalization, just to pay attention that the fact is the precise definition of radicalization is the ideology and the process to justify violence. It's not fundamentalism. Well, the question is why this case of psychological profile could find in Salafism a kind of utopia which make him a hero. That's the question. Why this offer is so convincing? That's the question.
It's a bit like the case in Orlando.
In what?
Exactly. In Orlando.
Yeah, exactly. But I would like you to pay attention to the fact that we use the term of jihadism, which is a nonsense. It's exactly the same word that the jihadists used against people in the Western country, using the terms of crusaders. The crusade was an imperialist offensive on Middle East, and jihad is when we talk about jihad, we talk just of the form of violence, and we don't have to use just that term. The term is the Salafism. The Salafism is this ideology, which a friend of mine, a theological expert on Islam, defined for me like the most sexist, racist, anti-Semitic, homophobic, and misogynic interpretation of Islam. When you have exactly the definition like that, you understand that Salafism is a new totalitarian religious ideology. The problem for us is, because we say that religion, we don't want to be involved in the repressive policy regarding this practice of Islam. But we need it. If we don't qualify precisely the enemy, we use some generic terms like radical Islam, radical Muslim, which is nonsense. We don't have to use jihadism, we have to use Salafism, and you know the difference between the quietist and peaceful Salafist and the radical Salafist is a very thin paper of tobacco. You can't say, for example, that exactly the same question that if you ask, was Hitler really anti-Semitic before he rules the country? I mean, we have this ideology, which is a political ideology contesting republic. So we have to use the good terms, and we have to use the good policy.
Okay, so to get back to what that academic said, what do you do in places like Nice, where it seems as though there are people who are not going to the mosque and getting radicalized elsewhere?
Yes, you can. We know precisely some place in which you have some Salafist imam. You have some neighborhood in which to have, for example, clandestine schoolship. For example, we don't have to support that. We have to be really strict on what is not a religion. It's a political, ideological situation and the practice of anti-republican movement. So we can use a lot of measures today. We are not, for example, we have in France some imams.
And how do you draw the line so that you're not constraining religious freedom?
It's a lot of some measures. For example, today in France we have some imams we are still paid by Saudi Arabia. It's not possible. I don't understand why. We have, for example, to implement a law to control foreign subsidies to associations. They have done it in Israel, you understand? Mm-hmm. And we have to do it, for example, for some mosque, for some Muslim association. And that's some practice. We have some measures to take.
Senator, is that one law that's not on the books that needs to be?
Oh, there are so many of them which are not on the books yet. But yes, we need to close these Salafist mosques. We need to have imams who preach values, who speak in French, so we can understand and monitor what they're saying and take measures if they don't speak French and if they don't speak in the way they should be preaching Islam. So that's extremely important. But we also have to work on these issues. I mean, because I'm not sure this guy who committed the Nice attack would have even known what Salafism was. I'm sure he wasn't well educated enough to be able to make the differences between the various strands of Islam religion. So we have to work in prevention. And once more, this human neighborhood intelligence is very important. We need to devote many more efforts to that. We need to check the internet content. We need to try to eradicate radical violence. I mean, in a way, I'm thinking of a political scientist, a French political scientist, who spoke, and I think it applies to that case, about radicalization, Islamization of violence. And I think that's what it is. I think at the basis, this guy was a violent person, and the Islam, Salafism or whatever, gave him the way
his outlet.
to get, yes, it was an outlet, it was a way to pretend and to reach some stardom, as many people try to get.
Just a remark. You know, the political debate today is very low-level debate because we had more than 250 dead in 18 months in France, which means that we are in the 4th or 5th waves of terrorist attack. And we still discuss about the measure of security in France. No, the good question is, why are we the main goal of Salafists today? And the question is, we are not just struck by terrorist attack because what we are, but because what we do. And we are in Syria fighting against Daesh, and the local countries, the regional countries are not, which means that they are fighting against Shias in Yemen, and they are just Western armies fighting against Daesh. That's not possible. We are struck by terrorist attack, and the Bataclan's terrorists were explaining that you bomb on your country so we can kill people on your country.
Louis Bernard, President Hollande promised more bombing raids over Syria and Iraq.
Well, in the long term, it's a very good idea to go and try and eradicate Daesh from parts of Syria and Iraq, which now it occupies. And basically, we should start with the big cities, the strongholds such as Raqqa and Mosul, because that's how you win a war. The Islamic State, of course, has gained power because he has gained resources and grounds and cities, and imposing the worst Sharia law possible. But France is a little bit on the forefront of this war against the Islamic State, and it has to be a global effort. And on the ground, we really don't see that coming. Is this going to automatically stop the attacks on France? It's very hard to say. You only have to have one person, very violent person, getting radicalized in a matter of weeks or days, and having a license to drive trucks in order to commit a massive massacre. So it's not going to automatically stop. Maybe it's going to, in the short term, going to make France even more a good target for people returning from Syria. But of course, things have to be done on the ground and also in France. You have two battlefields, if you.
Benjamin Herbibou, I want to ask you, what do you make of the booing of the Prime Minister today in Nice?
Why do I? Sorry.
What do you
don't hear
make
you
of
very
the
well.
fact that the Prime Minister was booed by the crowd in Nice today?
I don't know. I would say that in these days, it's not the time for commenting on the political response, even if we can understand that people are angry about what's happening. But the thing is that this question is much more complicated than what most of people think. And this act of terrorism is a perfect example, because we could not predict that this guy would do something like that. What we think, I want to say that I totally agree with what I heard before, but I would add something. Salafism, of course, is a political proposition, and we have to fight this. But in order to fight this, we need to understand how these convictions, this ideology, can have such support in France. And the thing that we understood from our work on the field is that there are few kind of ideologies that leads to break with the society. And once people don't want to integrate in the society, it makes them very vulnerable and very susceptible to join this kind of ideology.
This
and
kind of movement.
Totalitarism.
Let me ask Pierre Conessa about this, because there's a local context in this. Nice is not a place where the socialists do well anyway in elections. The ISIS, what they would like, if I understand this correctly, would be an all-out war between them and what they call infidels, right? In Nice, you have this rise, on the one hand, of, in some places, some academics describe it as places that are a little bit out of control. And on the other hand, you have the far right, which is really grown. There's this group called Bloc Identitaire, which is further to the right of the National Front, much further to the right. And one of their co-founders has now joined the Front National.
Yeah, two questions. The first one is the local context. Nice and the Alpes-Maritimes, the region, has sent more than 10% of the French foreign fighters in Syria, which means that there is a local Salafist jihadist context in Nice. That's the first point. That's why, the human means is probably the way by which, the guy received operational instructions. And the second point is that, I'm surprised in the French debate in France. I was invited on TV, Antenne 2, in a debate 10 days after the Bataclan terrorist attack. And there was Madame Maréchal Le Pen, Mr. Mélenchon, and Mr. Le Maire. They were debating on the danger of Front National. But the main danger in France is Salafism. That's not the Front National, which killed 84 people in the Promenade des Anglais. So we're in.
But doesn't an attack like this one? But doesn't an attack like this one play into the hands of a France where it's the far right that's going to get more votes now?
But
and
that's a mirror. They're working in a mirror, because the Front National is probably increasing because of economic crisis, because of delegitimation of political classes, etc., etc. But also because, the political speech about the question is so unbelievable. They say, no, that's not Islam. Yes, that's Islam. Today, we are facing a debate which is very important. All the Muslims are not terrorists, but all the terrorists are Muslims. So we have to face the problem and to say that's a part of Islam. We call it Salafism. We don't want it on the territory, and we have to take measure on this goal. And second point, as you remember, when they are the Madrid and London terrorist attack, everybody agreed on the fact that it was because Spain and Great Britain were in Iraq with the United States. And today we are explaining that's not, we are a goal of terrorist attack because of our values. No, we are also attacked because of what we do.
Right,
we are bombing there.
Yeah. But from another point of view, we can't just remain there and not help and try to solve the situation in the Middle East. Maybe we are doing it in a way which is not the right way, but I feel it's our duty to try to act.
No, it's not our duty.
Is.
No,
it is.
But then do you just
Well,
leave,
it
do you just
depends.
leave ISIS
If you
have
want
territory in
France to
Syria and
have a
Iraq?
universalist
the more
attitude,
bloody crisis after the Second World War was the Congo crisis. 2.5 million deaths, more than 20,000 children kidnapped. Do you remember what we have done there? No, we are dealing with Middle East because of ideological reason. But when you look at the region in which you have Afghanistan, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Bahrain, Somalia, in which you have a fight between Shias and Sunnis, what can we do in that mess? We can't do nothing. So we are fighting against Daesh, and the Saudis are fighting against Shias. You know that in the refugee crisis, the Gulf states are not welcoming known refugees. And they propose to Germany to build 200 mosques. I don't understand. I understand nothing.
That I totally agree. It's a very important issue, this issue of refugees, because it's true, no Muslim country except Lebanon, Jordan,
and Turkey, yes.
And Turkey, obviously, but other reasons are welcoming
and
these refugees.
You know because why they don't want to welcome the refugee? Because when you sign the International Convention of Refugee, you can welcome everybody. Whatever could be their religion, their sex, etc. But in Saudi Arabia, they don't want, they just want Sunnis. That's a shame, that's a scandal.
Yeah, but maybe it's a good thing that the French policy is not mirroring the one of the Saudi Arabia. I mean, I'm not too sure about our duty to intervene in the Middle East, but in the way that European countries are not dealing with the refugee crisis, there is a values to be shown there. And I'm not too proud of the values that France has been showing on the refugee crisis so far, as opposed to what happened in Germany, for example. If we take as an example the refugee policy of Saudi Arabia, maybe that's not the example that we want to follow anyway. So in terms of the duty of France, I think we should separate the moral duty. I think we should separate the refugee crisis to terrorism. For example, this guy in Nice was not a refugee, has been living in France for ages, was a Tunisian resident, has absolutely nothing to do with the way we are dealing with the refugees. Maybe something to do with what we are doing on the ground militarily, but not with the refugee crisis.
I'm not taking the example of refugees crisis. I'm just explaining that the Gulf states are not welcoming refugees.
Very
That's
true.
the scandal.
And we are welcoming what, 700 of them?
Yeah.
They have the means.
No, true.
We're gonna leave it there. I want to thank Louis Bernard. I want to thank Joël Garriot-Malem. I want to thank Pierre Conessa and Benjamin Herbibou for being with us from Nice. Stay with us. Our Media Watch segment is next. And we say hello to James Creedon.
Hi, François. Obviously, a huge amount of coverage and an analysis of what happened in Nice last week in the media ever since. Just some articles that I've picked out for you this evening. What is a constant cycle of violent news doing to us? That's one angle that has been covered because, especially in France, 3 big attacks in the last 18 months. And in fact, some studies have been done showing that people have symptoms similar to post-traumatic stress disorder, especially because of the omnipresence of news coverage with the use of social media, etc. People are really exposed to a massive amount of multimedia extracts, analysis of these events. So actually, one piece of advice that Katie Rogers has picked out in the New York Times is that people should designate time to expose themselves to news coverage, to have a look at Twitter, to have a look at social media, and time when you just plug out and you don't constantly expose yourself to a barrage of information about bad news. So that's just one stepping back.
Louis Bernard,
from it.
is that something, because your job is security and risk consulting, is that something you have to do to yourself to wean yourself off the news cycle sometimes?
To plug out, I must say, it's very hard for me to do, but yes, I should. And sometimes I allocate time off, but this weekend, for example, has just been so massive. I'm not talking badly about 24 news networks, of course, but the idea that when you've heard the same thing 3 times, normally that's the time when I plug out.
All right, this advice there.
Staying with the New York Times, another piece that caught my attention, in the age of ISIS, who is a terrorist and who is simply deranged? I think it's a question that has been asked a lot about the Nice attacker. It does seem that he had an interest, it's established that he had an interest in radical Islam. The Islamic State organization has claimed, saying that he was one of their soldiers, so there was some link, even if it seems it was very, very quickly established. But if we're talking generally here, it does seem like that line is becoming increasingly blurred. Daniel Benjamin, who is a former State Department coordinator for counterterrorism in the US, said to the New York Times, the Islamic State and jihadism has become a kind of refuge for some unstable people who are at the end of their rope and decide they can redeem their screwed up lives by dying in the name of a cause. I've heard it referred to as well as going from zero to hero. So people who were marginalized, deranged, perhaps, certainly not religious in any classical sense of the word, looking for some sort of an excuse to act out on their violence.
That's a kind of offer of Islam in kit, You get it, right. You have the permit to kill.
And another hero, not a rebel without a cause, but a rebel searching for a cause. That's another way of seen it described. So I think that's certainly something that has been discussed in the aftermath of the Nice attack as well. Just finally, another piece in Le Monde by Laurent Bigot, a chronicler for Le Monde Afrique. I thought this was a really interesting piece. He said he could only handle about 5 minutes of the immediate coverage in the aftermath of the attack because war specialists were brought on. And he was saying, I want to see people talking about peace. How can we actually get to the root of these problems, find out what is behind terrorism, and actually from the root resolve it. And for Laurent, that is WIBAUX, that is a question of education, and it is also it's chiefly education, in fact, and not combating terrorism in a warlike manner. And indeed, the hysteria around the coverage of terror attacks can actually potentially contribute to people being inspired by it and acting out in future so-called copycat incidents. We've heard a lot about that as well in discussion of school shootings in the US, but I think it's also true of terror attacks.
Certainly food for thought. Many thanks, James Creedon. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24.